Time is a funny concept. 10 years ago, when I was 11, I became cognizant of the fact that my time on this earth is not unlimited. And ever since, I've been fascinated with how to maximize my time. Sometimes that obsession was a good thing for me. I remember vowing to stop drinking soda and eating junk food when I was like 14 for my long-term health. And sometimes that obsession was not so good for me, as it caused me to develop a bit of an antagonistic perspective on sleep. When I was like 17, I went through a period of desperately hoping science would develop a pill that made it so you didn't have to sleep at all, which was my justification for absolutely messing up my circadian rhythm, possibly permanently. Recently, what I've been most interested in with regards to time is not how we can get our hands on as much of it as possible, but rather how we perceive it and what gives it value. Hayao Miyazaki's 2013 film The Wind Rises and Mamorou Hosada's 2012 film Wolf Children, I believe, are interested in these same things. Even if it wasn't the central thesis of either, they communicate so much about the subject of time in such a way that A, I don't think I've ever seen another film do quite as compellingly, and B, I haven't heard anyone else discuss. Oh, and if it wasn't obvious, huge spoiler warning for these movies, I very highly recommend both of them. They are each fantastic films. Anyway, both The Wind Rises and Wolf Children portray the lives of their characters over the course of a little more than a decade. They each show us different attitudes that people take towards how they spend their life, and even if neither film is directly intentionally about these themes, I think they ultimately feed into the same ethos about how our limited time is best spent. And when you're looking out for it, it becomes impossible to unsee as early as the opening scenes. An observation that has been made before of The Wind Rises is that its introduction to the main character, Jiro, which comes in the form of a dream sequence, is completely devoid of dialogue. And the choice to begin a movie like this is clearly done to get the audience immediately understanding the headspace he is in. That is, of complete admiration for the art of aviation, an admiration so intense words cannot describe it. But I think it equally conveys the way that many people, especially those of us with very intense passions, remember our childhood, and how we came to discover whatever it is that we are so passionate about. When you're a child, it's hard to understand why you love something. The feeling of joy and wonder is there, but the fact that you don't have the words to describe it yet almost intensifies the experience. It takes on a unique shape in our memories because we can rarely recall all the acute sensory details of our childhood, but what we do remember is the emotions we experienced. It's a very raw and pure way of experiencing the world. Contrast that with Wolf Children's opening scene, which features not just dialogue, but a narrator who happens to be the daughter of the main character. In fact, she starts talking before we even see any visuals. Instead of an abstract dream sequence, we follow the main character, a woman named Hana, through a very normal day at her university, and a very unspectacularly presented montage sequence of her burgeoning relationship with the future father of her children. It's a much slower-paced first act than in The Wind Rises, and it serves to steep the viewer into their day-to-day life. It's almost mundane, but in an appreciative, loving manner. By the time both Jiro and Hana are each thrust out into the world by themselves, so to speak, twice as much time has passed in Wolf Children as in The Wind Rises. As soon as Jiro decides that he wants to be an aeronautical engineer, we immediately transition to him as a young adult already on his way to secondary school to study in the field. And the majority of screen time his childhood receives is spent literally inside his dreams, admiring the beauty of aviation. Jiro is looking exclusively towards the future at the expense of things like spending time with his younger sister, though I'll elaborate on this detail later. On the other hand, Wolf Children savors the limited time that Hana and the father have together before he dies, the moment which marks the real start of her journey. And this is the type of comparison that could be made a lot, especially throughout the first half of each film. Wolf Children uses montage several times when Hana, Yuki, and Ame experience a significant change in circumstances in order to acclimate the audience to their new normal. It shows the audience a huge quantity and wide variety of events, and in that quantity and variety creates the feeling of weeks and weeks passing by over the course of just a minute or two. It presents itself the way that you would recall a huge series of events in your own memory. That's what gives it the impression of an enormous amount of time passing without actually needing to be an enormously long movie. which is super fitting because, again, this film is narrated from the perspective of Hana's daughter Yuki after the events of the film when she and Ame moved out of the house. It is in no small part a depiction of Hana's memories, and Hana is someone who seems to have endless memories of her life to share because she is always completely in the moment. I can so easily picture her going on and on to Yuki about that time she scared a dog by barking at it and nearly revealing the fact that she's part wolf. Or the exact look in Ame's eye after she got in a fight with him. Or the time that weird guy Hana saw at her university helped a little kid who just tripped and fell. All of these little details give us an experience and an emotion to pin a memory onto, and the ultimate effect is that after finishing Wolf Children, you have countless memories to look back on. And I think it's worth taking note of the fact that nearly all the events the film chooses to show us depict Hana reacting to the circumstances that life puts her in, particularly the challenging circumstances. I mean, persevering through hardship is basically her entire character. She was named Hana because Hana means flower in Japanese, and when she was born, her father saw flowers blooming outside despite the fact that no one had planted any seeds. They managed to bloom without anyone else's help. Even Hana's children are named after the circumstances in which they were born, Yuki meaning snow and Ame meaning rain, both of which are challenging weather conditions that we have no control over, reflecting Hana's struggle to maintain control over all of the chaos that is brought into her life by being a single parent. But this isn't to characterize that which we have little control over as strictly negative. Wolf Children has an undeniable love and appreciation for the natural environment. Obviously, many of the most visually spectacular scenes in the film focus on the beauty of nature, but I believe that love and appreciation is present in nearly every shot of the film. The cinematography, especially after the family moves out of the city, consistently chooses to maximize the presence of a character's surroundings in the frame at times when other films would get up close to a character to emphasize facial or bodily expressiveness. Sometimes it even shows an identical shot from earlier in the film, but at a different time of year and under different weather conditions, which has the effect of emphasizing the passage of time in the sense that only the passage of time could turn this exact location into something that feels so completely new. This reinforces Wolf Children's perspective that the world surrounding us is a constant presence in our lives, affecting everything we do, and so being in touch with it, appreciating how it is impacting every moment we spend on this earth, allows us to appreciate every moment we spend on this earth better. And this appreciation of the beauty that comes from things we cannot control is core to the lesson that Hana must internalize by the end of the film. And it's a reality that every parent must one day come to terms with, which is that, at a certain point, you have to let your children become their own people. Trying to control them as they age will go about as well as trying to control the weather. But if Wolf Children portrays the world as something which imposes itself onto Hana, then The Wind Rises portrays Jiro as imposing himself onto the world. At multiple points throughout its runtime, we are told about or directly see the destructive consequences that planes have on the natural environment and humanity. Importantly, Jiro is exactly as privy to this information as the audience, and yet he pushes forward. His unwavering passion for aeronautical design is treated almost like a natural disaster, unthinking, prone to causing destruction, and unstoppable. At least until it was too late to stop. If you've seen the film, you know that although Jiro absolutely does pursue his dreams of designing airplanes at the expense of anything and everything multiple times throughout the entirety of the film, even if that means designing planes that will be used in war, it would be inaccurate to say that this reflects his mindset and values throughout the entirety of the film. That is, of course, because halfway through the movie, nearly on the dot might I add, Jiro reunites with Naoko Satomi, the girl he met on a train when he was on his way to secondary school, then subsequently helped during the Great Kanto earthquake, and the woman he quickly forms a deeply passionate romantic relationship with and will go on to marry. This reunion sparks an immediately observable change in Jiro. The very next sequence after helping Naoko, Jiro returns to his room, imagines one of his planes falling apart in mid-air, a sight he bore witness to numerous times at this point, and in his mind, walks away from the rubble. I cannot stress enough how enormously significant this moment is. Like I said, Jiro, up to this point, has exclusively had his sights set on being the vanguard of aeronautical design. It's so clearly his entire purpose of being, to the extent that even other characters in the story take notice. Such as when his coworker Honjo comments that Jiro has a face like he's carrying the future of Japanese aviation. And the first half of The Wind Rises reflects this perfectly. In contrast with Wolf Children's frequent use of montage to show the audience a huge breadth of moments in the main characters' lives, The Wind Rises portrays fewer, longer, more acutely detailed scenes with years-long time skips in between them, which are nearly undetectable, especially on a first watch. After Jiro hits puberty, his character design hardly changes at all, making it very ambiguous how much time it's been since 2 minutes ago in the film. The fact that Wolf Children centers around the lives of, well, children makes this much easier to discern, since they visually change a lot more noticeably both in stature and in attire. The first half of The Wind Rises seems intent on making the audience constantly go, "Oh geez, has it really been that long?" And I can think of no better example of this than Jiro's relationship with Kaio, his younger sister. We see Kaio exactly 3 times over the course of this movie. Once when she is a child at the very beginning, where she only wants to spend time with her big brother despite Jiro showing no interest in her whatsoever. Then, like I said, we immediately transition to Jiro leaving home to go to school in Tokyo, and it's not until 2 years after that that Kaio and Jiro have another on-screen interaction. And yet again, Kaio tries to make a connection. She chides him for not visiting home and speaks of wanting to move in with him in Tokyo. And again, Jiro is completely unreceptive. The scene cuts away before we even see what response, if any, he gave to Kaio berating him for not visiting home. And when she asks to move in with him, he just flatly says it's probably not gonna happen because he'll be out of school working elsewhere by the time she's old enough to go to higher education. The single instance of Jiro expressing any sort of affirmation or encouragement to Kaio in response to something she says to him in the entire movie is when she says she wants to study medicine. And it clearly means a lot to Kaio. But then, once again, we hard cut to Jiro on a train moving on to the next stage in his life, leaving his sister behind. We don't see Kaio for the next hour and 15 minutes of screen time, and when we do, she is already interning as a doctor. The dramatic irony of this scene clearly being that only after the time to form a meaningful connection with his sibling has already passed him by, Jiro finally understands the value of that time because he has so little of it left with Naoko on account of her having terminal tuberculosis. To me, it feels like Jiro built up all of this forward momentum in his career, and by the time he realized that he shouldn't have invested absolutely everything into it, he's unable to turn the ship around. Mentally, he walks away from his dream plane. He entirely stops having dreams of Giovanni Caproni, his aeronautical hero, the man whose work first fanned the flames of his passion for aircraft design until the end of the film when he's reflecting on how well spent his life was. However, Jiro's work is still to design the next greatest warplane, and he still does in the third act of the movie. But he goes from getting completely and entirely lost in his work to the point that his coworkers have to remind him to eat lunch, to reluctantly finishing up some equations on a train while crying because all he can think about is how fast he needs to get to Naoko after hearing news of her having a bloody coughing fit. Naoko's deteriorating health keeps the knowledge of finite time in the minds of the audience as The Wind Rises gets closer and closer to its conclusion. And in doing so, it elevates the value of every scene that gets closer and closer to that endpoint as well. We've already spent so much time thinking about what's next for Jiro, how his work will influence the future. It's not until we can see the end on the horizon that we even realize how valuable each individual moment in that journey is. Both of these films stress the importance of spending one's time wisely. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, they do it in very unique ways. But I think that what brings that extra bit of value to comparing and contrasting them through this lens is how they impart that lesson onto the audience from opposite sides of the same coin. Wolf Children shows us a character who is engaged in her immediate circumstances at all times, giving everything she has to solve problems as they arrive on her front door, and never wasting an opportunity to experience joy when life allows it. And this character is completely satisfied and happy with the last decade of her life. Meanwhile, The Wind Rises shows us a character who ignored his environment and flew through life as fast as the planes he designed flew through the sky, so far above the world beneath him that every building, street, and person just looked like ambiguous dots and lines passing by. And he ends up with huge regrets about the last decade of his life. Like I said, I'm not convinced that the concept of time, how we experience it, and how we give it value was the intended central theme of either of these films. The Wind Rises is just as much a love story and an illustration of the banality of evil, and Wolf Children is just as much, if not more so, about overcoming challenging circumstances, determining self-identity, and where we fit into the world. But there are just so many filmmaking tendencies and tertiary details in these movies that seem tailor-made to nudge the viewer into thinking about how we experience this finite asset, and to reflect what that experience feels like. Something I appreciate more and more about Wolf Children with every watch is how capable it is of quickly shifting the tone of each scene. One moment the family is playfully running through the snow, the next Ame almost dies, the next Hana is teaching Yuki a silly little rhyme to help her remember not to turn into a wolf while she's at school. And every emotion in these kinds of sequences lands perfectly because the story takes such a realistic approach to presenting its characters' emotions. In real life, if you zoom out not even that much, every few hours you're probably experiencing a totally different emotion. Wolf Children so clearly understands that, and it's a core part of why each and every scene is so memorable, aiding to the feeling of a ton of time passing over the course of just its 2-hour run. And then you have The Wind Rises symbolism of the wind itself, which I previously couldn't parse the meaning of when discussing this movie years ago, but that seems obvious now with this framework for understanding the film. When the characters say, "The wind is rising, we must try to live," they're saying, "Time's a ticking, so savor every moment." I also think this explains the motif of smoking throughout the film. It's not just presented because people smoked all the time back then, it's also because smoking deteriorates our breath, the wind in our lungs, and when that wind stops rising, it means our time is up. I think it says something about how important understanding the value of time is that two films made under completely different circumstances by completely different people about completely different people could end up feeling like they share so much DNA. I think it says that this is a very fundamentally human concept, one that everyone can get value out of thinking about. And although I can't be certain, I do hope that Miyazaki, Hosada, and everyone who worked on these movies can look back on them after the decade and change it's been since they came out and feel satisfied. I don't say this often, but I'd really love to hear what you all have to say about this topic in the comments, especially if you know of other films that weave the temporal experience of watching it into an observable theme about time. Lastly, this video featured music that was made by my friend Jakelis. He is one of the most talented musicians I have ever seen, and he is very close to releasing some of his official debut material. Give him a listen, links in the description. Anyway, that's all for me today. I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.